Lucas Bennett had always prided himself on control. A self-made billionaire, his empire was built on precision and an unrelenting drive for success. But none of that prepared him for Sophia. She was a dog walker, grounded and real, and in her presence, Lucas felt something he hadn't in years: vulnerability. But now, Adrian was back. Adrian Harris was everything Lucas wasn't: charming, dangerous, and obsessive. A man whose twisted love for Sophia had crossed every line, whose anger had pushed her to the edge. Adrian's return threatened everything Lucas had fought for. "You think you can protect her, Lucas?" Adrian's voice hissed through the phone. "She's mine, and I'll burn everything you've built to take her back." Lucas's heart raced as the words hit him. "She's not yours, Adrian. I won't let you near her." Sophia's voice trembled. "Lucas, he's here. He won't stop." Lucas's blood boiled. He wasn't just protecting her, he was ready to burn everything to keep her safe. Lucas Bennett stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, his gaze lost in the sprawling expanse of Los Angeles. The city below glittered, a vast sea of lights stretching into the horizon, each one a testament to the wealth and power of the world he inhabited. From this height, everything seemed small, insignificant, like a toy model of the world. Yet there was no comfort in it. The silence in the room felt heavy, oppressive, as though the emptiness of the city mirrored the emptiness inside him. At 36, Lucas had everything: money, success, power, but it all felt hollow. His tech company had taken off years ago, earning him respect, admiration, and envy. His name was constantly in the media, associated with innovation and wealth, but it felt like a mask. He was surrounded by people who only saw the surface, the glossy exterior of a life that promised everything but delivered nothing real. Relationships, even with his closest friends and business partners, felt transactional. Everyone wanted something: money, influence, connections. But no one cared about who he really was, about the person beneath the sharp suits and polished speeches. And then there was Max. Max, his golden retriever, was the only creature who ever truly seemed to understand him. Max didn't care about stock options or flashy cars. Max was loyal, uncomplicated, and loved him unconditionally. It was a bond Lucas had come to cherish more than he would ever admit. But even Max wasn't enough to fill the growing emptiness. Lucas had begun to feel like a ghost in his own life, drifting from one moment to the next, always searching for something he couldn't name. The weight of his success, the expectations of others, the constant pressure to be more, do more. It was exhausting. On that crisp autumn morning, Lucas decided to take Max for a walk. It was rare for him to break his rigid schedule, but something inside him urged him to step outside, to escape the sterile, cold confines of his high-rise apartment. Maybe the fresh air would clear his mind, even if only for a moment. He slipped on a jacket and attached the leash to Max's collar, heading out the door of the penthouse. The cool Los Angeles air hit his face as they stepped onto the bustling city streets, and for the first time in weeks, Lucas felt a sense of relief. The sounds of the city, the distant hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, the occasional honking of horns, felt like life again. It was chaotic, imperfect, but real. Max tugged at the leash, eager to explore. Lucas allowed him to lead the way, his mind wandering as he followed the dog through the familiar streets. They arrived at a small park, the kind of place that seemed out of place in the heart of the city. It was quiet here, a green oasis surrounded by high rises and the ever-present buzz of urban life. Max immediately ran off, chasing after a group of dogs playing near a fountain. Lucas smiled faintly, watching the dogs romp around with carefree energy. He'd forgotten what it was like to be carefree, to not have the weight of the world on his shoulders. And then he saw her. She was kneeling by the fountain, petting a terrier, her laughter ringing through the air like a melody. She was unpolished, her auburn hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her cheeks flushed from the cool air. She wore a simple hoodie and jeans, but there was something about her, something that made her stand out without trying. Max bounded toward her, his tail wagging wildly. She looked up, her eyes meeting Lucas's for the first time, and smiled. "Well, hello there, handsome," she said, reaching down to scratch Max behind the ears. "You're full of energy, aren't you?" Lucas couldn't help but feel a tug in his chest. There was a warmth in her voice, something genuine and sincere that made him forget for a moment about the suit he wore, the high-rise apartment, the world he was trapped in. "Sorry about that," he said, feeling slightly awkward as he walked over to her. "He gets a little too excited sometimes." "No problem," she replied, still smiling. "He's got a great personality, full of life." Lucas looked around, noticing the other dogs gathered around her. "Are all of these yours?" he asked. She stood up, brushing a few stray hairs out of her face. "Oh, no," she said with a soft laugh. "I'm Sophia. I'm a dog walker. These are just my regulars." Sophia. The name fit her. Lucas wasn't sure why, but something about it felt right. She seemed so different from the polished, perfect women he was used to seeing in his world. She was real without trying to be. There was no pretense, no facade, just honesty. "I'm Lucas," he said, extending a hand. "Nice to meet you." She shook his hand, her grip firm. "Nice to meet you too." The brief exchange lingered in the air between them, but neither of them spoke for a moment. Max tugged at his leash, pulling Lucas away, and he looked down at the dog, then back at Sophia. "Well, it was good meeting you," Lucas said, but there was something in his voice that made it sound more like a question than a goodbye. Sophia smiled again. "It was nice meeting you too. Take care of him," she said, nodding toward Max. "He's got a lot of love to give." Lucas hesitated for a moment, something tugging at him. There was something about her, something that felt different, but he couldn't place it. As he turned and walked away, the sound of her laughter echoed in his mind. He shook his head, trying to shake off the feeling, but it lingered, like a thread pulling him back. The next day, Lucas found himself walking to the same park with Max again. He could have hired a professional dog walker, but something made him want to find Sophia. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him, the way she had made him feel like he wasn't just another wealthy client. She hadn't been impressed by his success, his name, his money. She had treated him like a person, not a business transaction. When he found her, she was just finishing up with another dog. He hesitated, unsure of how to approach, but when she saw him, her face lit up with a smile that made something inside him stir. "Back for more?" she asked, a playful glint in her eyes. Lucas felt a smile tug at the corners of his lips. "I think Max likes you," he said, holding out the leash. "I'd like you to walk him again." Sophia raised an eyebrow, but took the leash with a nod. "You sure about this? I'm just a dog walker, you know." Lucas nodded, the weight of his usual world suddenly feeling less important. "I'm sure," he said, his voice steady. As they walked away together, the quiet of the park surrounding them, Lucas felt something shift in him. For the first time in a long time, he felt something that wasn't tied to money, success, or power. Something real, something simple. And for the first time in years, Lucas Bennett realized that maybe, just maybe, he had finally met someone who saw him for who he really was. Lucas was restless that afternoon. The soft hum of the city below his penthouse seemed distant and hollow. He had been pacing back and forth, glancing at the calendar on his phone, his finger hovering over the business dinner scheduled for the end of the week. He had done this 1,000 times before, dinners, meetings, and events with high-profile individuals, all designed to maintain his status and grow his empire. But this one felt different. He had spent his entire life immersed in the world of business, where success was measured by profit and power, where connections were a means to an end. But recently, it had all started to feel suffocating. He needed something else, something real. Max, his loyal golden retriever, was lying on the floor, looking up at him with gentle eyes. The dog was always there for him, but Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he, too, was becoming a part of the same void. It was in moments like these that the loneliness of his life felt too heavy to bear. He glanced at the clock. It was nearly time for Sophia to arrive. She had become a fixture in his afternoons, an unexpected presence that seemed to ground him in a way nothing else could. The brief moments they shared when she took Max for walks were a rare escape from the world of suits and boardrooms. She was different, unlike anyone he had known. She didn't ask anything from him. She didn't care about his wealth or status. She didn't even seem to notice it. And that was exactly what Lucas needed. The doorbell rang, and Max sprang to his feet, tail wagging in excitement. Lucas felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't sure why he felt so drawn to her. Maybe it was because she didn't seem to care about the things everyone else cared about. Maybe it was because, in her presence, he could be just Lucas. Not the tech mogul or the man whose every move was scrutinized. Just Lucas. He opened the door, and there she was. Sophia stood in the hallway, smiling that easy, unassuming smile that had somehow become his lifeline in the past week. She was dressed casually, her auburn hair tied up in a messy ponytail, her clothes simple but comfortable. Lucas felt a strange sense of calm wash over him just by seeing her. "Hey, Max," Sophia said, bending down to greet the dog. He bounded toward her, practically knocking her over with excitement. She laughed, her voice light and unburdened. It was a sound that felt like sunshine breaking through a storm cloud. "Hey," Lucas said, his voice quieter than usual. "How's it going?" Sophia stood up and looked at him, her gaze steady. "Good. Max has been a handful today, but you know him." She shrugged, as if it was all part of the job. "How about you?" Lucas hesitated for a moment before answering. Same old. Just busy, I guess." He forced a smile, but it felt thin. "I'm glad you're here." Sophia gave him a small, knowing smile. She didn't push him. Instead, she gave Max one last affectionate pat before standing up. "Ready to go?" Lucas looked down at Max, who was already pulling at the leash, eager to be outside. He nodded, his heart beating a little faster than it should. "Yeah, let's go." They stepped outside, the cool air hitting them as they made their way down the elevator and out into the bustling streets of Los Angeles. The contrast between Lucas's world and Sophia's was evident as soon as they stepped onto the sidewalk. He lived in the heart of the city, surrounded by wealth and luxury, while she walked the streets with an ease that seemed so foreign to him. It wasn't just about the physical space. It was the difference in the way they moved through the world. Sophia was in her element. She didn't notice the looks from passing strangers, the whispers behind her back. She didn't care. She was content in her own skin. Meanwhile, Lucas found himself overly aware of every glance, every judgment. He had built his life to be untouchable, yet here he was, feeling like an outsider in his own city. They walked for a while in comfortable silence, Max happily trotting ahead. As they turned onto a quieter street, the noise of the city seemed to fade, and it felt like the world had shrunk to just the three of them. Lucas was conscious of the way Sophia moved, the way her presence seemed to shift the air around her. She was just herself. She didn't put on any airs. She didn't try to impress him. She was simply, honestly, who she was, and that was something Lucas wasn't sure he had ever experienced before. "Do you like this? Walking dogs?" Lucas asked, breaking the silence. It wasn't the question he had intended to ask, but somehow it felt like the right one. Sophia looked at him for a moment, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Yeah, I do," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "It's not glamorous. It's not a job people brag about at dinner parties. But it gives me the chance to connect with animals, and with people too. I've learned a lot from doing this." Lucas raised an eyebrow. "You've learned a lot from walking dogs." Sophia laughed. "More than you'd think. I've learned patience, and I've learned that there's more to life than just success. The small things matter, like watching Max chase after a squirrel, or seeing a dog's face light up when they get their favorite treat. It's the simple stuff, you know." Lucas felt a knot form in his throat. It wasn't just the words she was saying. It was the way she said them. There was no pretension in her voice, no desire to prove anything. She was simply present. And in that moment, Lucas realized how much he had missed that. He had spent so many years chasing success, trying to build an empire, that he had forgotten how to simply live. They stopped for a moment, and Lucas watched as Sophia crouched down to give Max some attention. He could see the bond between them, the way she cared for the dog with such genuine affection. Max nuzzled her hand, and Lucas couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. Why couldn't he have that? A connection so simple, so real. Sophia looked up at him, her expression soft. "You okay?" she asked, her voice quiet. Lucas nodded, his throat suddenly tight. "Yeah, just thinking." Sophia stood up and gave him a small smile. "Thinking about what?" He hesitated. For a moment he wanted to tell her everything, the loneliness, the pressure, the endless chase for something he could never quite grasp. But he couldn't. He wasn't ready. Instead, he simply said, "I don't know. Just life, I guess." Sophia studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face as if trying to read something beneath the surface. But she didn't press him. Instead, she nodded, as if understanding that sometimes words weren't necessary. "Well," she said, "life has a way of working itself out. You just have to give it time." Lucas watched her, feeling something shift inside him. She was right, of course, but hearing it from her felt different. For the first time in a long time, he felt like there was someone who wasn't just in it for the ride, someone who cared. About him, about life, about the small things. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but somehow he knew that he was beginning to find it. As they walked through the streets of Los Angeles, Lucas felt the weight of the world lift ever so slightly. The noise, the chaos, the expectations. They didn't matter, not with her by his side. And as the city lights flickered in the distance, Lucas felt a glimmer of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Lucas couldn't stop thinking about their walk the other day. The easy conversation, the way Sophia seemed to effortlessly pull him out of his world, made him feel like he was seeing things in a new light. The emptiness that had weighed on him for so long wasn't gone, but there was a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. He found himself looking forward to their daily walks, not just because Max needed it, but because he did too. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, calls, and business as usual, but the moments with Sophia felt like a lifeline, a breath of fresh air he didn't even know he needed. Every time she arrived at his penthouse, Lucas felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. His heart would race a little when she walked through the door, her eyes lighting up when she saw Max, her easy laughter filling the room. It was simple, but it was enough to make him question everything he had once thought was important. And then came the invitation. The dinner. He had been dreading it for weeks, but the thought of facing it alone had become unbearable. He needed someone there who wouldn't judge him, someone who would see him for who he truly was, Not the successful businessman, not the tech mogul, but just Lucas. The idea of asking Sophia to come with him had taken root in his mind, and now there was no turning back. He hadn't really expected her to say yes. She wasn't someone who belonged in those circles, but she had. She had agreed without hesitation, and that moment, when she said yes, had shaken him more than he cared to admit. The day of the dinner arrived, and Lucas found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror. He looked the same as always, sharp, polished, in control. But there was a restlessness in his eyes, something that couldn't be hidden. He had always prided himself on being prepared for everything, but this was different. He was nervous. Not about the business, but about Sophia, about how she would fit into this world, this life he had built. He wasn't sure why it mattered so much. It shouldn't. He had dealt with these kinds of dinners before, surrounded by people who only cared about making deals, who wore their status like armor. But with Sophia, it felt different. He didn't want to watch her get swallowed up by this world, to see her feel out of place among the polished faces and scripted conversations. When he arrived at his penthouse later that evening, he was greeted by the sound of Max's excited barking. But it wasn't just Max that caught his attention. It was the soft sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. Sophia was standing in the doorway, looking like she had just stepped out of a dream. She was wearing a simple black dress, elegant but understated, the kind of dress that didn't scream for attention, but drew it nonetheless. Her auburn hair cascaded in loose waves down her back, and the soft glow of the lights in the room seemed to highlight the natural beauty she had always possessed. For a moment, Lucas couldn't breathe. The contrast between her and the women who usually filled his life was staggering. Sophia wasn't trying to be anyone she wasn't. She wasn't hiding behind a facade or a carefully crafted persona. She was just her, and that in itself was more than enough. "You look incredible," Lucas said, his voice hoarse. He hadn't meant for it to come out that way, but the words seemed to spill out before he could stop them. Sophia's cheeks flushed, and she smiled softly, a mixture of surprise and shyness in her expression. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I was nervous, you know. I don't usually do the whole fancy dinner thing." Lucas stepped closer, feeling a strange sense of protectiveness wash over him. "You'll be fine," he said, his voice steadier now. "Just be yourself. That's all I'm asking." Sophia nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She glanced down at her dress, tugging at the fabric nervously. "I don't know, Lucas. I feel out of place, you know. This isn't my world." Lucas reached out, gently lifting her chin so that their eyes met. "It's not about the world, Sophia. It's about who you are, and I want them to see you, the real you." The words felt heavy between them, charged with an unspoken truth. Lucas didn't know what was happening between them, but he couldn't ignore it. The way he felt when she was near, the way she made him feel alive, not just in the sense of adrenaline or business, but in the simplest moments, in the way she talked about life, in the way she interacted with Max, in the way she made him see the world through a different lens. Sophia swallowed, her lips trembling slightly. She was trying to steady herself, but Lucas could see the vulnerability there. She wasn't used to this world, but for reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't want her to feel like she didn't belong. "You belong here," he said quietly, his voice firm. Sophia's eyes softened, and for a moment it felt like everything in the room paused. She nodded, her expression a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "Okay, I'll try." The drive to the restaurant was quiet, the tension in the air palpable. Lucas kept glancing over at Sophia, who sat in the seat beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He could sense her nerves, her discomfort with the whole situation. She wasn't used to this world, this life of wealth and power, but Lucas wasn't sure what was worse, her discomfort, or the fact that it felt like he was putting her in a position where she had to prove herself. When they arrived, the grandeur of the venue hit them both like a tidal wave. The high-end restaurant, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, was the epitome of everything Lucas had worked for. It was polished, pristine, and intimidating. The kind of place where deals were made in hushed tones over expensive wine, where power played its part in every conversation. As they walked through the door, the whispers started. Lucas could feel the eyes on them immediately. The guests at the bar, the staff, the investors, everyone turned to look at the unlikely pair. He could see their skepticism, their confusion. They weren't used to seeing someone like Sophia here. She didn't fit in. But what they didn't realize was that she was the one who brought a warmth to the room, the one who wasn't pretending to be someone she wasn't. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Sophia whispered, her voice tight with uncertainty as she clung to his arm. Lucas smiled softly, leaning in so only she could hear. "Trust me. You'll be fine." They were soon approached by a group of Lucas's colleagues, all eager to meet Sophia. Adrian Foster, a slick business partner of Lucas's, stepped forward with a smile that was just a little too perfect. "Lucas, who's this?" he asked, eyeing Sophia with more curiosity than politeness. "This is Sophia," Lucas replied, his tone guarded. "She's a friend." Sophia extended a hand, offering a polite smile, but Lucas could see the nerves in her eyes. Adrian's gaze lingered a moment too long, clearly intrigued by the fact that Lucas had brought someone so different. Sophia cleared her throat and shifted uncomfortably. "I walk dogs," she said simply, as if offering an explanation for her presence in this world of luxury. The tension in the air thickened. Adrian raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "A dog walker," he repeated, his voice dripping with condescension. "Interesting choice for a dinner like this." Before Lucas could respond, Sophia spoke up. Her voice, though soft, was steady. "I've found that the simple things in life are sometimes the most important. Dogs, they don't care about status or wealth. They care about connection. I think that's something we could all learn from." The words hung in the air, and for a moment the room was still. Lucas felt a surge of pride. She wasn't backing down. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, but her words held more weight than anything he'd heard in this room full of polished executives. The silence was broken by a soft laugh from one of the investors. "Well said," he remarked, nodding slowly. "It's easy to forget the simple things." And just like that, the ice was broken. The guests began to warm to Sophia, drawn in by her authenticity, her ability to speak from the heart, not from a script. As the evening wore on, Lucas found himself standing by her side, watching her effortlessly shift the energy in the room. She wasn't just a dog walker, she was someone who reminded them all of what truly mattered. Connection, sincerity, honesty. By the end of the night, the whispers had faded. In their place was genuine admiration, and Lucas, standing next to her, realized that he had never been more proud, not because of his business, not because of his wealth, but because of the woman beside him, the one who had turned a night filled with superficiality into something real. The days following the business dinner felt strange, as if everything in Lucas's world had subtly shifted without him even realizing it. He had been dreading the event for so long, but Sophia had turned it into something completely unexpected. The way she had spoken so candidly, so naturally, in the midst of all the polished high society figures, it had left an impact on him and on everyone in the room. It was as if she had broken through the invisible walls that separated them all, reminding them of what truly mattered: authenticity, connection, and realness. But as the days passed, a lingering sense of uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't stop thinking about her. She had walked into his world, into a place where people were constantly putting on masks, pretending to be something they weren't, and she had remained, untouched, unfazed. Her presence was like a breath of fresh air in a room filled with stale air. It wasn't just that he had enjoyed her company. There was something deeper at play. Lucas had spent his entire life building walls around his emotions, around his heart, because it was easier that way. If you didn't let anyone in, no one could hurt you. But Sophia had found a way in, and it terrified him. The way she made him feel seen, truly seen, was something he hadn't experienced in years, maybe ever. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Lucas found himself standing by the window of his penthouse, staring out at the city below, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, half expecting another work email, but it wasn't. It was a message from Sophia. "Hey, I know we've been busy lately, but I just wanted to thank you again for letting me come to the dinner. I know it was a little outside my comfort zone, but I really appreciated it." His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to reach out like this, not so soon. He knew she had been nervous about the dinner, but the way she had held herself there, standing firm in the face of skepticism, had impressed him. She was stronger than anyone he had ever met, yet so unassuming. "You were amazing. You made a bigger impact than anyone could have imagined. And I'm glad you came. I'm just glad you're part of my life now." Lucas stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what to say. Part of him wanted to keep things light, casual, but another part of him, the part he rarely let out, wanted to say something more. He wanted to reach through the phone and tell her what she had done for him, what she had made him realize. But he wasn't sure he was ready to say those words aloud. He typed slowly, then deleted the message, and then typed again. After several minutes, he sent it. "I don't know what I expected from that night, but having you there, it was exactly what I needed." A few moments later, his phone buzzed again. "I'm glad, really." Lucas felt a tightness in his chest. What was it about this woman that made him feel so vulnerable? He had no answers, but he knew one thing. He didn't want to lose whatever this was. Later that evening, when Sophia arrived to walk Max, the atmosphere was different. There was a tension between them, an unspoken understanding that things had shifted. When she walked into the penthouse, she smiled, but her eyes were searching his face, as if trying to gauge his mood. "Hey, Max," she said, crouching down to greet the dog. Max wagged his tail furiously, licking her hands in his usual exuberant manner. But Lucas couldn't tear his eyes away from Sophia. She was the same, but something had changed, something between them. "Hey," Lucas said, his voice low, almost tentative. He cleared his throat, trying to push the awkwardness away. "Ready for another adventure?" Sophia stood up and smiled, though it was a little unsure. "I guess so. You know, I don't think I'll ever get used to how fancy this place is. Every time I walk in here, I feel like I'm in a movie." Lucas chuckled softly, the sound a little too tight. "It's just a place," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Doesn't feel like much, honestly." Sophia raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "I would say this place has a lot of character, and a whole lot of space." She paused, looking around, then turned back to him. "But I get what you mean. It's just a building at the end of the day." Lucas nodded, but he couldn't help but feel the weight of her words. It's just a building. He had everything he had ever wanted: money, success, power. But standing in that luxurious penthouse, surrounded by things he had worked so hard for, he realized how empty it all felt. Sophia didn't care about any of it. To her, it was just a building. To him, it had become a cage. As they walked through the streets of Los Angeles, the noise of the city enveloped them. The hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, It was the soundtrack to their lives, yet it felt different now. There was a new dynamic between them. The usual ease of their conversations seemed to be weighed down by something unspoken. Sophia, as always, took the lead, her steps light and confident. But Lucas found himself falling behind, lost in his thoughts. He watched her, the way she interacted with the world around her, so genuine, so unafraid to just be herself. It made him wonder if he had ever truly been himself, or if he had just been playing a part for so long that he had forgotten who he really was. "You seem quiet today," Sophia said, glancing over her shoulder at him. Her voice was gentle, but it carried a weight that made him stop in his tracks. "Is everything okay?" Lucas stared at her, the question hanging in the air between them. He had been pretending even to himself that everything was fine, but it wasn't, and she could see it. "I don't know," he said slowly, his voice low. "I've spent so much time building this life, this empire, and I thought it was what I wanted. But now, with you—" He paused, searching for the right words, but they didn't come. "I don't know anymore." Sophia stopped walking and turned to face him. Her expression softened, and she took a step closer. "Lucas, you don't have to have it all figured out right now. You don't have to know everything. Just be honest with yourself. And with me." His breath caught in his throat. There it was again, her ability to cut through the noise, to make him feel like he was more than just a collection of achievements. "I think I've been hiding from a lot of things," he admitted quietly. "I've been hiding from what really matters." Sophia's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but grounding. "You don't have to hide anymore. Not with me." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. It was the simplest thing, just the feeling of being seen, of being understood. But it was more than he had ever hoped for. He had built his life around the idea that success meant everything, that being strong meant never showing weakness. But now, with Sophia, he felt something different. He felt the possibility of being something more. For a moment, they stood there in silence, the city around them moving on, indifferent to their quiet moment. Max tugged at the leash, breaking the stillness, and they both laughed softly, the tension easing between them. "I think Max is ready for his next adventure," Sophia said with a smile, her hand slipping back to the leash. Lucas nodded, the weight in his chest lifting just a little. "Yeah, let's go." As they walked side by side, Lucas realized that this simple, quiet moment was exactly what he had been searching for. He didn't need the wealth or the status or the power. All he needed was to be seen, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had finally found someone who truly saw him. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't running from it. The days after their walk had passed quickly, but each one felt heavier, as though the connection between Lucas and Sophia was growing tighter and more impossible to ignore. Their conversations had become more frequent, their moments together longer, and Lucas found himself waiting for each afternoon when she would arrive to walk Max. It wasn't just the company, it was the ease, the simplicity of being with someone who didn't ask for anything other than his presence. But there was an unease settling in the pit of Lucas's stomach. He had been living his life in this perfect, carefully constructed bubble, one that protected him from the real, raw emotions that seemed to surge to the surface whenever Sophia was around. He had worked for so many years to achieve everything he had: success, wealth, power. But none of that seemed to matter as much as her words, her laugh, the way she made him feel like he could be more than just a businessman. That evening, as he sat in his penthouse, staring out over the city, he heard the familiar sound of Max's excited barking at the door. He turned to see Sophia standing in the entryway, her face slightly flushed, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail. She was as effortlessly beautiful as always, but there was something different in her eyes today, something that made Lucas's pulse quicken. "Hey, Max," she said cheerfully as the dog bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. She crouched down to greet him, laughing softly at the dog's enthusiasm. Lucas took a deep breath. His heart raced, and he couldn't help but feel a tension between them, something unspoken but undeniable. "You okay?" Sophia asked, standing up and brushing off her jeans. She looked at him, her gaze steady but searching, as if she could sense the restlessness inside him. Lucas hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to confront whatever was stirring inside him, but he couldn't hide it any longer. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about everything." Sophia gave him a small, understanding smile. "What's on your mind?" she asked gently as she walked toward him, her presence grounding him. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I don't know how to explain it," he began, his voice trailing off as he struggled to find the words. "But it feels like I've been living in this bubble, you know. I've spent so much time building a life around success, around what people expect from me. And I've gotten so good at it. I've become really good at being who people want me to be." Sophia watched him quietly, her expression soft and patient, allowing him to continue. She didn't rush him, didn't pressure him for an answer. "But the thing is," he continued, his voice growing more fragile, "I don't think I'm being myself. I think I've lost who I really am. I've built this world around me to protect me, to keep people at a distance, and it worked. But with you, I feel like I don't know who I am anymore." Sophia stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his heart race. "Lucas," she said softly, "you don't have to be anyone else. You don't have to pretend with me." Lucas looked down, feeling the weight of her words settle deep inside him. He had been running from his true feelings for so long, burying them under layers of success and wealth, afraid that if he let anyone in, they would see the vulnerability he had worked so hard to hide. But with Sophia, none of that seemed to matter. She saw him, the real him. "How did you become so real?" Lucas asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I've spent my whole life pretending, and you just are. You don't need to hide anything." Sophia smiled gently, the corners of her lips curving upward. "I guess I learned early on that pretending to be something you're not only makes you lose sight of who you really are. Life's too short for that." There was a long pause, the silence between them heavy with unspoken truths. Lucas could feel the vulnerability in the air, the way Sophia had stripped away the layers of his carefully constructed life, and it scared him. But it also made him want to be better, to stop hiding, to stop running. "You've made me want to stop pretending," Lucas whispered, his words barely audible as he stepped closer to her. Sophia didn't say anything at first. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm, a silent reassurance. It was enough to make his chest tighten, to make him feel like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he had thought. Max barked again, breaking the stillness of the moment. Lucas smiled softly, the tension in the air dissipating, even if just for a moment. He turned to Sophia, the weight of his feelings finally beginning to make sense. "Ready for a walk?" he asked, his voice steadier now, his heart lighter. Sophia grinned. "You bet." As they walked through the streets of Los Angeles, the evening air was cool, the lights of the city casting long shadows on the pavement. Lucas found himself walking beside Sophia, no longer feeling the need to guard his emotions, no longer pretending to be someone he wasn't. For the first time in years, he felt free. Their conversation was light at first, but it was real, They talked about their lives, about the things that mattered, the things they had been through, the things they still wanted to do. And with every word that passed between them, Lucas could feel the wall he had built around himself start to crumble, piece by piece. As they reached a small park near the edge of the city, they stopped and sat on a bench, the cool breeze rustling the leaves of the trees above them. Max lay contentedly at their feet, his head resting on Lucas's shoe. "I've never really stopped to appreciate the small things," Lucas said after a while, his voice soft. "I've always been so focused on the next big thing, the next deal, the next goal. But it's moments like this. These are the things that matter." Sophia turned to him, her eyes soft, her gaze steady. "Sometimes we need to slow down to really see what's in front of us. Life isn't about the big milestones, it's about the little moments, the ones that make us feel alive." Lucas nodded slowly, her words sinking in deeper than he expected. For so long he had been chasing after success, thinking that it was the key to happiness, that it would fill the emptiness inside of him. But now, sitting here beside Sophia, with the cool air surrounding them and Max peacefully resting at their feet, he realized that he had been wrong. Happiness wasn't about success. It wasn't about wealth. It was about connection. About being seen for who you truly were. "You've changed me, you know that," Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've made me see life differently. You've made me realize that I don't need all of this." He waved his hand around, motioning to the world of wealth and status that he had built for himself. "I just need honesty, realness." Sophia smiled, the warmth of her expression making his chest tighten. "I think you've always known that, Lucas. You just needed to believe it." For the first time in a long time, Lucas believed it too. He believed that he didn't have to hide anymore, that he could let go of the walls he had built around himself and embrace the life he truly wanted. A life where he didn't have to pretend. A life where he didn't have to be anyone but himself. "I think I'm finally starting to understand what matters," Lucas said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Sophia's smile grew wider, and for a moment it felt like the whole world had faded away, leaving just the two of them. The city, the success, the wealth, they didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was the connection they shared. And for the first time in years, Lucas felt like he had found exactly what he had been searching for all along. Not success, not power, but realness. And for the first time, he was ready to embrace it completely. The air in Lucas's penthouse was thick with anticipation. It had been days since he'd last seen Sophia, and every part of him was restless, waiting for the next moment he could see her again. Their walks had become a lifeline for him, a brief escape from the suffocating world he had built around himself. But today, it wasn't just about their usual routine, it was different. He had asked her to dinner, a small, intimate gathering that wasn't about business or appearances. He needed to understand where this feeling between them was leading. He had spent hours thinking about what to say, rehearsing words that didn't sound too needy, but that also conveyed everything he had come to realize about her, about what she made him feel. But when the moment arrived when he saw her standing in the doorway, looking as effortlessly beautiful as ever, all of the carefully chosen words evaporated. He was left with nothing but his raw, honest emotions. Sophia stood there for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "You look different," she said softly, stepping closer. She wasn't referring to his appearance, but something more. There was a vulnerability in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. Lucas swallowed hard, taking in her words. He had always been guarded, always put up walls to protect himself, but around her, those walls were slowly crumbling. "I feel different," he admitted quietly, his voice cracking with the weight of everything he wasn't saying. Sophia's gaze softened. Different good or different bad? He chuckled, a strained sound, but it was a start. Different good, I think. His smile was small, tentative, but it was real. For the first time in a long time, Lucas wasn't hiding behind his polished exterior. He was standing there, vulnerable, unsure, but with the desire to be seen for who he truly was. Max, ever the disruptor, bounded toward them, wagging his tail and barking happily, and they both laughed, the tension momentarily broken. But the moment didn't last. As they stood there, a quiet, unspoken understanding passed between them. Something was shifting, and neither of them was sure where it was leading. Sophia looked at him, her expression softening. "I've never been to a fancy restaurant like this before," she said, breaking the silence. "But I trust you." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "You don't have to be someone you're not tonight. Just be you. That's all I'm asking." She smiled at that, and for the first time in days, Lucas felt the weight of the world lift off his shoulders. He wasn't trying to impress her, and she wasn't trying to impress him. It was simple, honest. And that simplicity, that authenticity, made everything else fade into the background. The drive to the restaurant was filled with a strange silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that came from two people who didn't need to fill the space with words. Sophia sat beside him, her hand lightly resting on her lap, and Lucas could feel the presence of her energy, calm and steady, beside him. As they arrived, the grandeur of the restaurant hit them both at once. The marble floors, the soft glow of candlelight, and the faint sound of a live jazz band playing in the background, all of it felt like a stark contrast to the simple, grounded walks they had shared in the park. Sophia shifted in her seat, her nerves suddenly visible. She was out of her element here, and Lucas could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened, the way she hesitated before stepping out of the car. "You okay?" Lucas asked, his voice soft. Sophia nodded, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Just not used to all of this. It's a lot." Lucas reached over, placing his hand on hers, feeling the warmth of her skin. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone here. You're just you. That's more than enough." Sophia looked at him, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. In his eyes, she could see something she hadn't expected to find in the world of polished dinners and high society. She could see truth, she could see acceptance, and that was enough to settle the fluttering in her chest. They entered the restaurant together, and the whispers immediately began. The guests, wealthy businessmen, investors, and socialites, stopped talking the moment they walked in. Lucas, in his perfectly tailored suit, was a known figure, but Sophia was something new, something different. Sophia felt the weight of their stares, the judgment in the air. But she held her head high. She wasn't going to shrink back. Not here, not now. She belonged in this room just as much as anyone else. And for the first time in a long time, she realized she didn't need to prove herself. She had Lucas by her side, and that was all she needed. The evening started like any other. People came to say hello to Lucas, offering their greetings and compliments, but each one seemed to look at Sophia as if she were an anomaly, something that didn't quite fit the mold. But Lucas stood beside her, his presence a shield, his quiet support a comfort she didn't know she needed. As the dinner continued, the conversation turned to business, as it always did in these high society gatherings. Lucas listened intently, but his mind kept drifting back to Sophia, to the way she made him feel seen, for the first time in years. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or his status. She saw him as Lucas, not the persona he had built up over the years, and for some reason that made him feel more than he ever had before. At one point, Adrian Foster, one of Lucas's colleagues, leaned in toward Sophia with a smirk, his eyes glinting with condescension. "So, tell me, Sophia," he began, his voice dripping with skepticism. "What do you think of all of this? A woman like you in a place like this?" Sophia froze for a moment, the judgment in his voice unmistakable. She could feel the tension rise, but she wasn't going to let him get under her skin. She met his gaze with calm defiance, her voice steady and clear. "I think," she began slowly, "that people in this room care a lot more about appearances than they do about what really matters. But the thing is, I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here because Lucas invited me, and that's enough for me." There was a brief silence before the room seemed to exhale collectively. Adrian looked taken aback, his smug expression faltering for just a second before he regained his composure. The guests who had been watching began to murmur, some with surprise, others with curiosity. But Lucas could see the respect in their eyes, especially when they looked at Sophia. She hadn't backed down. She hadn't allowed anyone to make her feel small, and that was something Lucas couldn't ignore. For the first time, he realized that she wasn't just strong. She was exactly what he needed. She was a reminder that in a world full of pretenses, authenticity was a rare and beautiful thing. As the evening wore on, Lucas found himself drawn deeper into the moment, forgetting about the high society games, forgetting about the expectations placed on him. All he cared about was the woman beside him, the one who had made him realize that the real success in life wasn't measured by wealth or power, but by the people who truly saw you. When the night came to an end, Lucas walked Sophia to the car, his heart pounding in his chest. She had been nothing short of incredible, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them, something deep and undeniable. Sophia turned to him as they reached the car, her smile soft but genuine. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. "I didn't know I could survive a night like that." Lucas chuckled softly, a hint of tenderness in his voice. "You didn't just survive it, you owned it." Sophia's cheeks flushed, and she laughed softly, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "I'll take that as a compliment." Lucas took a step closer to her, his breath steady, but his heart racing. He reached out, gently touching her hand, his thumb brushing against her skin. "You're amazing, you know that?" Sophia looked at him, her gaze softening. "I'm just me." Lucas smiled, his hand lingering on hers. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running, he wasn't hiding. And as they stood there, the city lights shimmering around them, he realized that he didn't need to be anyone else. Not with her. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The week after the dinner was a blur of fleeting moments and deep thoughts. Lucas couldn't help but replay that night over and over in his head. The way Sophia had stood up for herself in front of everyone. The way she had spoken with such quiet strength. It had shaken something inside him, something he hadn't realized was still there. His feelings for her were becoming undeniable, but it was more than just attraction. She had made him see himself and the world around him through a lens that wasn't clouded by the expectations of society or the suffocating walls he'd spent years building. It felt raw, and it felt real, and it terrified him. He spent his days in the office, handling the usual business matters, but his mind often drifted back to her, to Sophia. It wasn't just her beauty, her effortless confidence. It was the way she seemed to pierce through the surface, getting to the heart of things, of people. She didn't need the trappings of success to feel fulfilled, and that was something Lucas had never experienced. The truth was, he was lost in her. He had been for a while now, but he hadn't allowed himself to admit it, hadn't let himself be vulnerable enough to acknowledge the depth of what was happening between them. He had always been in control of his life, of his image, of his emotions. But with Sophia, Nothing felt controlled. Nothing felt safe. And it terrified him. That afternoon, Lucas found himself standing by the window in his penthouse, staring out over the city, trying to quiet his racing thoughts. The weight of his feelings felt almost too much to bear, but he couldn't push them away anymore. He had come to realize something. He didn't want to keep running from the truth. He didn't want to keep pretending he wasn't falling for her. The sound of Max's excited barking snapped him out of his reverie, and Lucas turned, his heart skipping a beat as he saw Sophia walking through the door. The moment she stepped into the apartment, the air around him seemed to shift, the tension he had been holding inside suddenly dissipating. There was no need for words. Not yet. Just her presence was enough to bring a sense of calm he hadn't known he'd been missing. "Hey, Max," she said, crouching to greet the dog, who was already beside her, tail wagging furiously. Max was always the first to offer affection, a constant reminder of the simple joys Lucas had long forgotten. "Hey," Lucas finally managed, his voice a little too quiet. He found himself watching her with a strange intensity, his heart racing in a way he couldn't explain. Sophia stood up slowly, her gaze meeting his. There was a quiet understanding in her eyes, an unspoken acknowledgement of the shift that had taken place between them. "You seem distant today," she said softly. Her voice was gentle, but there was a sharpness to it, like she could see through the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he hadn't realized he still had. He felt exposed, vulnerable, and he hated it. "I've been thinking," he started, his voice thick with uncertainty. "About everything." Sophia tilted her head slightly, her expression softening. "What do you mean?" "About us," Lucas said, his voice barely a whisper. "About how everything feels different now. How everything feels so real when I'm with you." He took a deep breath, the weight of the words settling heavily on his chest. "And it scares me." Sophia took a step closer, her presence grounding him, though the storm inside him was still raging. "Why does it scare you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to be open. "Because I'm not sure I know how to handle it. I've spent my whole life building walls around myself. I thought I could keep everything and everyone at a distance, but with you it's different. I don't want to push you away, but I don't know how to be with you without feeling like I'm losing control." Sophia's gaze softened, and she reached out, placing a hand on his arm. The touch was light but firm, offering him the kind of reassurance he hadn't realized he needed. "Lucas, you don't have to be in control all the time. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest, with yourself, with me." Her words hit him like a wave, washing over him with an intensity he hadn't been prepared for. For so long, he had been afraid of letting go, of allowing someone to see the parts of him that were broken, that were imperfect. But with Sophia, it felt different. She didn't want perfection. She just wanted him. The real him. "I don't know if I can do that," Lucas admitted, his voice shaky. He felt exposed, more so than he had ever felt in his life. Sophia smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to do it all at once. Just take it one step at a time. I'm not going anywhere, Lucas." Her words were like a lifeline, pulling him from the edge of his self-imposed isolation. He didn't need to have everything figured out. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to be present. He just needed to let her in. Max, ever the interrupter, barked again, snapping Lucas out of his thoughts. He turned to see the dog looking up at him expectantly, tail wagging. All right," Lucas said with a soft chuckle, his mood lifting slightly. "Let's go for a walk." Sophia smiled at him, and for a moment everything felt right. The world outside, with all its demands and expectations, seemed distant. There was only this moment, only the connection between them. The walk through the city was like a breath of fresh air. The tension between them had lifted, but something had shifted. There was a new understanding between them, an unspoken promise that things were no longer about keeping up appearances. It was about being honest, about being vulnerable, about letting each other in. As they walked side by side, the evening sun casting long shadows on the pavement, Lucas found himself talking in a way he hadn't in years. He spoke about his past, his fears, his ambitions, but also about his regrets, the parts of him he had kept hidden for so long. And through it all, Sophia listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She just listened. "Do you ever wonder," he asked after a while, his voice quieter now, "if we're just chasing something we'll never catch? Like we're always looking for the next big thing, but we never really stop to appreciate what's right in front of us?" Sophia looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I used to, a lot. I spent so much of my life thinking that I had to prove something to everyone, that I had to be more, do more. But then I realized life isn't about chasing after things. It's about living in the moment, appreciating the people around you, the small things, the quiet moments." Lucas was quiet for a moment, her words sinking deep into his heart. For so long, he had been caught up in the race, in the constant pursuit of success, that he had forgotten what it was like to just live, to just be. He stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her. "I think I'm starting to understand that," he said quietly. His voice was thick with emotion, and he felt the weight of the truth settle in his chest. "I think I'm starting to understand what matters." Sophia smiled at him, her eyes soft with understanding. "It's not easy," she said, her voice gentle. "But you're not alone in it. You don't have to do it by yourself." And for the first time in a long time, Lucas believed her. The weight of the world, of all the expectations and pressures he had placed on himself, felt a little lighter. He didn't have to have it all figured out. He just had to keep moving forward, one step at a time, with her by his side. The world around them seemed to fade, the city's noise becoming nothing more than a distant hum as they walked together, side by side, both of them realizing that the path ahead was uncertain, but it was a path they were willing to take, together. The city was alive with its usual buzz, the faint hum of traffic, the chatter of late-night revelers, the occasional honking of horns. But for Lucas, it all felt distant. He sat in his office late into the night, his mind racing, fingers tapping restlessly on the surface of his desk. He had a business dinner the next day, another one of those polished affairs filled with executives, investors, and power players. But it wasn't the deal that had his mind occupied. It was Sophia. He couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she made him feel, like he was more than just his wealth, more than just his success. She had peeled back the layers he had spent years hiding behind, and for the first time in his life, he felt exposed, vulnerable, and it terrified him. The moment they had shared during their last walk, when he had admitted that he was scared to lose control, still lingered in the air between them. She had reassured him, her voice so steady and sure. But the truth was, he wasn't sure how to handle it. He had never allowed anyone to get this close, and now, here she was, standing right in front of him, making him question everything he thought he knew. The following evening, Lucas arrived at the dinner, but his mind wasn't on the business at hand. It was on her. He had tried to push the thoughts away, focusing instead on the investors in the room, the potential deals, but Sophia's words echoed in his head. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be honest." He had tried to be honest with her, but he still didn't know how to be honest with himself. He had spent so much of his life building an image, a facade, that he wasn't sure who he really was underneath it all. He glanced around the room, nodding politely to his colleagues, exchanging pleasantries. But he wasn't really here. He was thinking of Sophia, the way her laughter filled the air, the way her eyes softened when she looked at him. How, for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid to just be. As the evening wore on, the conversation around him grew more business-focused, but Lucas's thoughts drifted back to Sophia. She was everything he wasn't, genuine, unpretentious, and grounded in a way he could only envy. He didn't belong in this room, not like he used to think he did. His mind wandered back to their conversation. How many times had he told himself that his wealth and success were all that mattered, that the power he held, the admiration from his peers, was enough? But when he was with Sophia, those walls he had so carefully constructed started to crumble. With her, he wasn't just Lucas Bennett, the tech mogul. He was Lucas. Just Lucas. The tension in the air was palpable as Adrian Foster, one of Lucas's business partners, leaned in toward him, an air of smugness surrounding him. "You don't seem yourself tonight," Adrian said, his eyes glinting with amusement. "Something on your mind?" Lucas barely glanced at him, his attention still elsewhere. "Nothing to worry about," he said, his tone flat. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "If you say so. You've been distant lately. Is it the deal? Something we should be talking about?" Lucas could feel the weight of Adrian's gaze, but he didn't engage. "It's just business. No need to worry." But even as the words left his mouth, Lucas couldn't help but feel that there was more to it. Adrian didn't know it, but his words hit a nerve. Lucas had spent so much of his life trying to convince himself that this life was what mattered. But with Sophia, it didn't feel like enough anymore. He excused himself from the conversation, his head spinning. The business dinner felt like a blur as he made his way to the balcony, needing a moment to breathe. The cool air hit his face as he stepped outside, but it didn't help ease the storm swirling inside him. The city spread out before him, a sprawling metropolis of light and shadow, but it felt empty, hollow. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and that's when he felt the presence behind him. He turned to see Sophia standing there, her figure outlined by the soft glow of the lights in the distance. She had come. He didn't know how she had found him or why she had shown up, but in that moment, it didn't matter. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a warmth that cut through the chill in the air. Lucas stared at her for a moment, unable to hide the turmoil inside. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore." Sophia took a step closer, her presence a quiet reassurance. "You don't have to have it all figured out right now, Lucas. You don't have to carry everything on your own." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so long trying to do everything himself, trying to maintain control, and yet here she was, offering him something he hadn't known he needed: support, understanding. "I've spent my life building this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This image, this persona. I thought it was everything. But with you..." He shook his head, the words coming out tangled. "I don't know. With you, it feels like I'm finally seeing things clearly, but it's scary." Sophia stepped closer, her eyes soft with understanding. "You don't have to be perfect, Lucas. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just take it one step at a time. We don't have to rush. We can go at your pace." For a moment, Lucas stood there, caught between the weight of his past and the possibility of something new. He had spent so long pretending to be someone he wasn't, and now, in front of Sophia, he didn't have to. He could just be. "I don't want to hide anymore," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words felt like a confession, a release. I don't want to keep pretending I'm okay when I'm not, and I don't want to lose you. Sophia's gaze softened, and she reached out, gently touching his arm. You won't lose me, Lucas. Not as long as you're being honest with yourself. The weight of her words settled in his chest, and for the first time, Lucas felt like he could breathe. For the first time, he felt like he could let go of the image he had built, the persona he had constructed. He didn't have to be the perfect businessman or the untouchable millionaire. With Sophia, he could just be himself. Max barked from inside, breaking the moment, and they both chuckled softly, the tension in the air lifting. It was as though, in that moment, everything had shifted. Lucas didn't need to be anyone else. He didn't need to pretend anymore. Are you ready to go? Sophia asked, her smile warm and reassuring. Lucas nodded slowly, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. Yeah, he said softly, his voice steady. Let's go. As they walked back into the restaurant side by side, Lucas realized that he had finally stopped running from the truth. He didn't need to hide, didn't need to keep up the facade. With Sophia by his side, he didn't need to be anyone but who he truly was. And for the first time in years, he felt like he was finally home. Lucas stood by the window of his penthouse, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled like stars in the distance, but everything felt dim compared to the thoughts swirling inside him. His mind was a chaotic storm, and no amount of planning or thinking seemed to make it clearer. He had never been the type to lose control, at least not in the way he felt now. The walls he had spent years building, the carefully crafted image of success, were crumbling with each passing day. And the reason for it? Sophia. She had shifted something inside him, made him see everything he thought he knew about life in a new light. Her simplicity, her ability to just be, it had shattered his perception of what mattered. He had spent his whole life chasing success, believing that it was the key to happiness, the thing that would give him purpose. But now, he wasn't so sure anymore. He turned away from the window, his mind still racing. He needed to talk to her, needed to confront these feelings that had taken root in him, the feelings he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge for so long. She had been his anchor, the one person who made him feel seen for who he really was, not for the persona he had crafted over the years. But there was a fear gnawing at him, a fear that he would lose that connection, lose her. Sophia had become something more than just a part of his life. She had become his truth. But was he ready to accept it? The next evening, after a long day of meetings, Lucas found himself standing at the door of his penthouse, waiting for Sophia. It had been a few days since they had last seen each other, and in that time, Lucas had tried to clear his head. But nothing worked. The more he tried to push his feelings aside, the stronger they became. The doorbell rang, and he felt his heart skip a beat. He took a deep breath and opened the door, his eyes immediately searching for hers. Sophia stood there, her face soft and welcoming, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his chest tighten. She had a way of looking at him, of making him feel like she could see right through him, to the parts of himself he had hidden away for so long. The mask he had worn for years didn't exist with her. And for the first time, he was starting to wonder if that was the most terrifying and freeing thing of all. "Hey," she said, her voice warm, like the sunlight filtering through the windows. "How's Max?" Lucas forced a smile, stepping aside to let her in. "He's been good, resting and, well, I've been doing a lot of thinking." Sophia raised an eyebrow, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "That doesn't sound like something you normally do." Lucas chuckled softly. "You're right. I usually keep my thoughts neatly packed away out of sight." He paused, looking at her, the words he had been holding back suddenly tumbling out. But you've changed that. Changed me. Sophia's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him. Lucas, you don't have to change for me. You don't have to pretend. I'm not pretending, he said quickly, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time, I'm not pretending. I don't know what to do with all this, with how I feel. Sophia studied him for a moment, then reached out, her hand gently resting on his arm. You don't have to do anything. You just need to be honest with yourself. Lucas let out a breath, his heart pounding in his chest. I've never let anyone get this close before. I've never let myself feel like this, and it scares me. He looked down, unable to meet her gaze for a moment. But I don't want to be scared anymore. I want to be with you. I want to understand what this is between us, and why it feels like everything is changing in ways I never expected. Sophia's eyes softened, her hand slipping down to take his. It's okay to be scared, Lucas. It's okay to not have all the answers, but you don't have to go through this alone. I'm here. I always will be. Her words, so simple, so genuine, hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so much of his life trying to control everything, trying to keep his emotions buried deep inside. But now, with her, he realized how much he had been holding back, not just from her, but from himself. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm sorry I've been distant. I didn't know how to deal with all this, with how you make me feel, how you make me want to be better. Sophia smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to apologize, Lucas. We're both learning. We're both figuring this out. And it's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay to just be. Her words were a balm to the rawness inside him. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to have it all figured out. All he needed to do was let go of the fear, let go of the control, and trust that what they had was real. I don't want to lose you, Lucas said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. The vulnerability in his words hung in the air, but he didn't shy away from it. This was who he was now. This was who he had to be. Sophia stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. You won't lose me, Lucas. Not as long as we're being honest with each other. She reached up, her hand gently brushing against his cheek, her touch like a spark that lit something inside him. He leaned into it, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of her presence wash over him. Later that evening, they sat together on the balcony, the city sprawling out beneath them, the soft hum of life around them, almost drowned out by the quiet between them. Max lay at their feet, content and relaxed, just as Lucas felt. You know, Lucas said after a while, breaking the silence, I've been thinking about how much time I've spent running from things, running from my feelings, from the things that matter. Sophia turned to him, her expression thoughtful. What made you stop running? He met her gaze, his heart full of something he couldn't quite name. You did. You made me realize that I don't have to be afraid of feeling, that it's okay to just be. Sophia smiled, her eyes soft and filled with a warmth that made his chest ache. That's all we can really do, isn't it? Just be with each other, be true to ourselves. Lucas nodded, the weight of the world lifting off his shoulders. He wasn't hiding anymore. He wasn't pretending anymore. And for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. With her. He leaned in, his breath shaky, and kissed her. It was soft at first, hesitant, like a question that had been waiting to be asked. But then, as her hand cupped his face, as her lips responded with equal longing, the kiss deepened, and Lucas felt everything inside him snap into place. The fear, the uncertainty, all of it faded into the background as the world narrowed down to just the two of them. And in that moment, Lucas realized that he didn't need to have everything figured out. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to trust in what they had, in what they were building together. Because for the first time in his life, he was certain of one thing. He didn't have to run anymore. Lucas sat on the edge of his bed, his hands running through his hair as he stared at the phone in his hand. The screen lit up with a message from Sophia, and for a moment he hesitated. He had been avoiding her, not because he didn't want to see her, but because he didn't know how to deal with what he was feeling. The emotions he had kept buried for so long were rising to the surface, and every time he thought he had them under control, they threatened to overflow. "Can we talk tonight? I think it's time we figured this out. Together." His heart raced at her words. She had been so patient with him, so understanding, and yet Lucas still wasn't sure how to handle what was happening between them. He knew he was falling for her, deeply, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to let go of the control he had spent his whole life building. His phone buzzed again, a reminder that life didn't stop for his confusion. He tossed it aside, his eyes drifting toward the window. The city below seemed like a different world now, one he didn't feel quite as connected to. The world that had once seemed so full of promise, of power and control, now felt hollow. His success, his wealth, it didn't matter in the face of what he had with Sophia, and it terrified him. That evening, Lucas found himself standing outside the small cafe they had first met, the same one where they had exchanged their first words, their first laugh. It felt like a lifetime ago. The air was crisp, the soft hum of the city acting as a backdrop to the quiet tension that had been building between them. He saw her walking toward him from a distance, her pace steady but cautious, as if she too was unsure of the ground they were about to tread. When their eyes met, he saw something in her expression, something that mirrored his own uncertainty. She had always been so open, so grounded, but now she seemed almost fragile. It was as though the weight of everything they had been through, everything they were about to face, was finally catching up with her. She stopped in front of him, her breath visible in the cool air. "Hey," she said softly, a tentative smile on her lips. "I didn't think I was going to see you tonight." Lucas swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "I wasn't sure I was ready either," he admitted, his voice low. "But I think we need to talk, Sophia." Her eyes softened, and she took a step closer to him. "About what?" He ran a hand through his hair, his thoughts scattered. "About everything. About us. About what's been happening. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like I'm losing control of everything." He shook his head, frustration rising in his chest. "I've spent my whole life controlling every part of me, my career, my image, my emotions. But with you, it's different. I can't control it, and I don't know how to handle it." Sophia's gaze didn't falter. She studied him, her expression a mixture of understanding and concern. "You don't have to control everything, Lucas," she said gently. "You don't have to be perfect for me. You don't have to have all the answers." "But I don't know how to just be," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "How do I just let go? How do I stop pretending that I'm okay when I'm not?" Sophia stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm, grounding him with the warmth of her touch. "It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be vulnerable. I'm not asking you to be someone else, Lucas. I'm just asking you to be honest, with me, with yourself." Her words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Lucas felt like the ground beneath him had shifted. She wasn't asking him to change. She wasn't asking for perfection. She was asking for something much harder, something that felt both terrifying and freeing at the same time. Honesty. "I don't know if I'm ready to let go of everything I've built," Lucas admitted, his voice raw. "I've worked so hard to get here, I've built this life, this image, and I don't know who I am without it." Sophia's expression softened, her hand slipping into his. "Maybe you don't have to give it all up. Maybe it's just about finding a balance. Maybe it's about letting go of the things that don't matter anymore." Lucas closed his eyes, her words sinking deep into him. She was right, of course. The image he had built, the facade he had spent years crafting, it didn't matter. Not to her, not to the connection they were building. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to have all the answers. He just needed to be. And for the first time in his life, he was starting to believe that was enough. "You're right," he said softly, opening his eyes to meet hers. "I've been so focused on holding everything together that I've forgotten what it feels like to let go." Sophia smiled, a soft, understanding smile that made his heart ache with the tenderness of it. "It's okay to let go, Lucas. It's okay to not have everything figured out." He squeezed her hand, feeling a wave of emotion wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, he knew one thing for sure: he didn't want to face it without her. They walked side by side to the cafe, the quiet tension from earlier dissolving into a sense of calm. The conversation flowed easily, but there was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared recognition that they were stepping into new territory together. The future was uncertain, but the way Sophia held his hand, the way she looked at him, told him that they didn't have to figure it all out right now. They just had to take it one step at a time. As they sat down at a table in the corner of the cafe, Lucas felt a sense of peace settle over him. The weight of his fears had not disappeared, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel so alone in carrying them. He looked at Sophia, her eyes filled with warmth and something deeper, a quiet strength that made him feel like he could finally breathe. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion, "for being patient with me, for helping me find my way." Sophia smiled, her eyes soft and full of understanding. "You don't have to thank me, Lucas. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." Her words settled over him like a blanket, and for the first time, he truly believed them. The future was still uncertain. There were still challenges ahead, but with Sophia by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. They would face it together. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of laughter and conversation, the world outside fading into the background as they continued to talk, about everything, about nothing. The simple act of being with her, of sharing this moment, was enough. As they left the cafe, walking side by side under the soft glow of the streetlights, Lucas realized that he was no longer running from himself, from his feelings, from the truth. With Sophia, he didn't have to hide. He could just be. And that was more than he had ever imagined he could have. The days after their quiet, honest conversation in the cafe passed in a haze. Lucas had hoped the relief he felt after opening up would last, but instead it came with new doubts. He hadn't expected to feel so raw, so exposed. The walls he'd carefully built around his life had cracked, and the vulnerability he now faced felt both liberating and terrifying. Sophia had been patient, understanding, but the weight of the truth still hung heavy over him. He had opened his heart to her, but what if that wasn't enough? What if the man he had become, the man who had lived so long under the pressure of perfection, could never truly be what she needed? His mind raced as he sat at his desk in the office the next afternoon, but the numbers and figures in front of him blurred into nothing. All he could think about was Sophia, the way she made him feel alive, the way she made him see the world differently, and, most of all, the way she made him believe that he didn't have to be perfect. Max padded into the room, tail wagging, his presence an anchor to the chaos swirling inside Lucas's mind. He bent down, scratching the dog behind the ears, but it didn't stop the storm inside him. He felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing between his old life and this new, unknown world that Sophia had brought him into. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. It was a message from Sophia. "I know you're busy, but can we meet later? I think we need to talk." Lucas's chest tightened as he read the words. He had known this moment was coming. He had known that things between them had to be addressed, but the idea of facing it, of fully confronting what they were, made his stomach churn. He hesitated before typing a quick reply. "Of course. I'll be there, whenever you're ready." Later that evening, Lucas stood in front of the same cafe, his heart in his throat. It was familiar, but tonight it felt different. This time there was no easy smile, no casual conversation. The weight of the uncertainty between them had settled in. He wasn't sure what they needed to say to each other, but he knew it had to be done. Sophia was already there when he arrived, sitting at their usual table, looking out at the street as if lost in thought. She looked up when she saw him, and the moment their eyes met, Lucas felt his heart skip a beat. There was something in her expression, something that told him she was holding back, just as he had been. She smiled softly, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey," she said, her voice quiet but warm. "Hey," Lucas replied, pulling out the chair to sit across from her. "I got your message. What's on your mind?" Sophia took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup as she gathered her thoughts. "I've been thinking a lot, Lucas, about everything." Lucas nodded, his heart in his throat. "So have I," he said softly. "I didn't want to rush anything, but I also don't want to keep pretending like I don't feel something real between us." Sophia met his gaze, her eyes searching his, as if trying to read him. "And what is that, Lucas?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas swallowed hard. The words he had been holding in for so long felt like a weight he could barely carry. "It's everything. I don't know how to explain it. With you, I feel like I can breathe, like I'm not just some facade anymore. But it scares me, Sophia. It scares me because I've never let anyone in like this before." Sophia's eyes softened, and she reached out to place her hand over his. "I don't want to scare you, Lucas. I never wanted to make things harder for you. I want to be honest with you. I don't want to hide anything. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm asking for us, for something real." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. The raw honesty in her words hit him harder than he expected. This wasn't just about love. It was about trust. And he realized in that moment that he had been afraid to trust, afraid to open up completely. But she was offering him something real, something pure, and all he had to do was accept it. "Do you really think this can work?" he asked, his voice strained. "I've spent so many years building this life, this image, and now, with you, I feel like I'm seeing everything for the first time. But I don't know if I can let go of it. I don't know if I can leave behind the life I've created for myself." Sophia's grip tightened on his hand, her eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to leave everything behind, Lucas. I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm asking you to trust me, to trust us." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. "But how do we know if we're enough? How do we know if what we have is enough to fight through all the things that are in the way?" Sophia smiled, her expression soft and sincere. "I don't know if we can be sure of anything, but I do know that I want to find out with you. Together." Her words felt like a balm to the wound he had been carrying for so long. He didn't have to have all the answers. He didn't have to have everything figured out. He just had to take the first step, trust her, and trust himself. "I've never been good at trusting anyone," Lucas admitted quietly. his voice thick with emotion. "But with you, I want to try. I want to be the person I know I can be." Sophia's smile grew, and for the first time, Lucas saw the depth of emotion behind her eyes. "Then let's do it. Together." The weight that had been pressing on his chest for so long seemed to lift in that moment, and Lucas knew, without a doubt, that this was the right thing. The fear that had held him back all this time was still there, but it didn't matter anymore. Because with Sophia, he didn't have to be afraid of feeling. He didn't have to be afraid of what could happen. For the first time in his life, he was ready to embrace the unknown. He was ready to step forward, to take that leap, and to let himself be real. Not the man who had built his success on walls and pretense, but the man who could finally be honest with himself. And with her. As they stood up to leave, the cold night air wrapping around them like a blanket, Lucas felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, but it didn't seem so overwhelming anymore. With Sophia by his side, he could face whatever came next. Max barked from inside the apartment as they entered, and Lucas smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had led him here. For everything that had led him to her. Sophia stopped in the hallway, turning to face him. Her eyes were soft, full of something deeper, something that went beyond affection. It was a shared understanding, a shared promise. "I'm here, Lucas," she said quietly. "And I'm not going anywhere." He reached out, pulling her into a tight embrace, the tension between them melting away in an instant. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was walking this journey alone. And that was all he needed. The world around them was uncertain, the future still unknown, but Lucas knew that with Sophia, he was ready to face whatever came next. Together. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Lucas's penthouse, casting long shadows across the room. He sat at his desk, papers scattered in front of him, his eyes scanning the words on the page. But his mind was somewhere else, somewhere far away. The weight of the conversation with Sophia the night before still lingered, the quiet understanding between them pressing on his chest like a secret he was only just beginning to realize. He had spent his entire life thinking he had control over everything. His career, his image, his emotions. But with her, nothing felt controlled. It was like she had come into his life and turned it upside down, not with grand gestures or promises, but with her presence, her patience, her unwavering belief that he was enough just as he was. And as much as he wanted to deny it, he couldn't. She had cracked open the walls he had built around himself, exposing the vulnerability he had spent years hiding. A knock at the door broke his train of thought, and he stood up, heart racing. He knew who it was before he even opened the door. Sophia stood in the doorway, looking like she always did, effortlessly beautiful, her eyes bright and alive. She had that effect on him. The moment she entered the room, everything else faded into the background. "Hey," she said, her voice light, but there was something in the way she said it, a softness, an invitation, as if she was saying more than just a simple greeting. "Hey," Lucas replied, his voice quiet, but full of something deeper than words. He hadn't realized how much he had missed her until she was standing there, so close. His chest tightened at the sight of her, his mind still racing with everything he wanted to say. Sophia smiled, but it wasn't the same carefree smile she usually wore. This one was softer, more reflective, as though she too was carrying the weight of the unspoken between them. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I've been thinking," she said, her tone serious now, as though she were preparing for something important. Lucas couldn't stop the nervous energy from building inside him. "About what?" he asked, his voice betraying the tension he was feeling. She walked over to him, her movement slow, deliberate. "About us," she said simply, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. "About where we're headed, about what we both want." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The moment he had been dreading, the moment when they would have to face the truth of what they were becoming. He had never been good at these conversations, at talking about feelings and vulnerabilities. But now, with Sophia standing in front of him, her eyes searching his face, he knew he couldn't run from it anymore. "I've been thinking about that too," Lucas admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "About how everything feels different now. About how I feel different." Sophia's gaze softened, and she reached out, gently placing her hand on his. Her touch was like a balm to the storm inside him. "It's okay to feel different, Lucas. It's okay to be uncertain. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to trust that we're in this together." Her words hit him harder than he expected. The simple act of her standing there, of her holding his hand, was a lifeline. He had spent so long afraid of the future, of what it would mean to let someone in. But with her, it felt different. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of what was ahead. He was afraid of losing her, of running from something that felt so real, so raw. "I don't know how to do this," Lucas said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to be the person you want me to be. I've spent my whole life hiding behind this image I've built. I don't know if I can let it go." Sophia's fingers tightened around his, her eyes searching his face as though she were looking for the words he wasn't saying. "You don't have to let it go, Lucas," she said gently. "You don't have to change who you are. You just have to stop pretending to be someone you're not." The simplicity of her words caught him off guard. She wasn't asking him to become someone else. She wasn't asking him to change his entire life. She was asking him to be honest, to be himself. And in that moment, Lucas realized that the only thing he had ever needed to be was real, with her. "I'm scared," he confessed, his voice cracking with the weight of everything he had been holding back. "I'm scared of what will happen if I let go of everything I've built, scared of losing myself in this, in us." Sophia took a step closer, her hand resting gently on his chest, over his heart. "You're not going to lose yourself, Lucas. You're going to find yourself. You're going to find out who you really are and who we can be together. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her words felt like a promise, like a declaration of trust that settled deep in his soul. He didn't have to be afraid. He didn't have to carry the weight of his past alone. With her by his side, he could face whatever came next. And for the first time, that idea didn't terrify him. It comforted him. Sophia's gaze softened, and she tilted her head slightly. "I know this is all new, Lucas, but I believe in us. I believe in what we're building together." Lucas's breath hitched as the truth of her words sank in. This wasn't just a fleeting connection. This was something real. And for the first time in his life, Lucas felt like he was ready to face it, head on, with no more hiding, no more pretending. He wasn't the perfect businessman, the perfect image of success. But with Sophia, he didn't need to be. "I believe in us too," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." She smiled, a soft, knowing smile that made his chest tighten with something he couldn't name. It was warmth and love and trust. "Then we'll face it together." As they stood there, the world around them seemed to fade. The weight of the past, the fears of the future, all of it disappeared in that moment. There was only the present, and in that present, everything felt right. For the first time in his life, Lucas didn't feel like he was just surviving. He felt like he was living. Max padded into the room, his tail wagging, and Lucas looked down at the dog, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The small moments, the quiet moments, had always been the ones that mattered the most. And in those moments, with Sophia by his side, Lucas knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. They sat down together, and the conversation flowed easily between them. But there was a deeper understanding between them now, a shared knowledge that things had changed. They were no longer just two people figuring it out as they went along. They were partners. They were in this together. The future wasn't clear. There would still be challenges, still be moments of doubt, but Lucas knew one thing for sure. He didn't need to face any of it alone. With Sophia, he could be real. With Sophia, he could let go of the fear and just be. And that was all he ever needed.